I want to start today by asking you to just take a second and listen. Not to me, but to the world around you.
It's pretty noisy out there.
It is deafening. I mean, we are living in an environment that is just absolutely obsessed with noise.
Completely.
You open your phone, and it's a 24-hour news cycle screaming for your attention. You have social media hot takes that are posted like literally seconds after an event happens. There's this relentless, frantic rush to the microphone.
Oh, yeah. It's the economy of attention, right? Volume is the currency. If you're not loud, you don't exist.
Exactly. And in the West specifically, I feel like we have trained ourselves and our leaders to believe that leadership equals volume.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't speaking, you aren't leading. If you aren't posting, you don't care.
Or worse, if you aren't speaking, you're hiding something. Silence is immediately suspicious.
Right. Silence makes us uncomfortable. We fill it with small talk at parties. We fill it with pundits on cable news. But today, we're going to flip that entirely on its head. We are going to talk about silence, not as an absence of thought, not as an awkward pause, but as a weapon. A heavy, deliberate, crushing force in international politics.
It is a fascinating pivot because we're going to be looking at how one major superpower, China, uses this weapon. We are exploring why, when the world feels like it is burning down and everyone else is shouting, Beijing often chooses to say absolutely nothing.
And to do this, we have a really unusual stack of sources today. I mean, usually on the deep dive, we were looking at policy papers, spy memoirs, or, leaked government documents.
Right, the usual suspect.
Today, we are looking at excerpts from a series called Strategic Silence, the Language of Chinese Diplomacy.
Which, I have to say, sounds like a textbook, a very dry textbook.
It is a textbook, or at least it's educational material. But here's the kicker. This material wasn't written for the CIA or the State Department.
Oh.
It was created by the Advanced Learners Studio for high-level language learners. We're talking C1, C2 level mastery.
Which, honestly, is one of the best ways to understand a culture. I love that we are using this. I think it's brilliant.
Explain that to me. Why is a language lesson a good source for decoding high-stakes geopolitics?
Because language isn't just about vocabulary lists and grammar rules. When you get to that elite level of language learning, when you are past the where's the library stage, you aren't learning grammar anymore.
Right.
You are learning psychology. You are learning culture. You are learning how a society encodes its values, its history, its priorities into the very structure of its communication. You learn what they say, but maybe more importantly, you learn what they don't say.
So the Advanced Learner Studio is basically teaching people the code, not just the language, but the subtext.
Exactly. It breaks down the nuance of why certain words are chosen and why others are pointedly omitted. It's a code book for cultural logic.
That is wild. So while the source material is framed as how to speak fluent professional English regarding China, what it's really doing is providing a masterclass for anyone trying to decode what is happening on the global stage.
Precisely. It strips away the political spin and just looks at the mechanics of the message. It tells you, when they say X, what they really mean is Y. It's an operator's manual.
So our mission today is to take these lessons and apply them to the real world. We want to understand the strategy behind keeping your mouth shut. We're going to look at the philosophy, the vocabulary, and then apply it to two fascinating case studies provided in the text: relations with Iran and the situation in Greenland.
And the central paradox we need to get our heads around is exactly what you started with, the noise versus the silence. The source material challenges us right out of the gate. It asks us to consider that silence might actually be the most aggressive, the most powerful move on the chessboard.
Okay, let's get into the definitions first, because I think this is where a lot of us can get tripped up. The source starts by making a critical distinction between two types of silence. It distinguishes between the silence of ignorance and strategic silence.
This is foundational. If we don't get this distinction, we're going to miss everything that follows. The silence of ignorance is, it's what we are all familiar with. If I ask you, what is the exact atmospheric composition of Jupiter? And you just stare at me.
I'm just staring at you. It's because I have no idea. I'm blank and my brain is just static.
Right. It is a lack of capacity. It is passivity. You are silent because you have nothing to offer. And that is how we often interpret silence in daily life, especially with public figures. If a politician doesn't answer a question, our default assumption is they don't know the answer or they're incompetent.
But that is not what is happening here. That's not the silence we're talking about.
No, not at all. Strategic silence, as the source defines it, is entirely different. It is an active choice. It's a verb.
Active. That feels contradictory. I mean, how can silence be active? It's the absence of action.
Well, think of it this way. It is a calculated decision to withhold speech, because the act of speaking would cost you something. It would be a liability. It implies that the state knows exactly what is happening. They have the intelligence reports. They have the analysis. They probably have a very strong opinion. But they have run the calculus and determined that sharing it publicly causes more harm than good.
So it's the difference between being speechless and holding your tongue.
That is a great way to put it. Yes, speechless is a reaction. Holding your tongue is a discipline. It requires effort. It requires immense control.
And the source material draws a direct line from this discipline to two massive pillars of Chinese foreign policy. These are terms we hear on the news all the time, but I feel like we just glaze over them. Non-interference and sovereignty. Let's drill down on those. Sovereignty. In this specific context, what are we really talking about?
Sovereignty is one of those words that gets thrown around so much it almost loses its meaning. But in the context of this source material, we need to look at the hard-line, almost absolutist definition. Sovereignty is the absolute right of a state to govern itself without any outside influence whatsoever. It is the idea that the borders on the map aren't just lines, they are walls. What happens inside those walls is the business of the people inside and nobody else.
It's the my house, my rules doctrine, but on a global scale.
Exactly. And you have to understand, for China, this isn't just some abstract legal theory. It's historical. It's deeply felt. The source alludes to the history of the 19th and 20th centuries, the so-called century of humiliation, where China's sovereignty was constantly violated by foreign powers. So for them, sovereignty is sacred. It is the shield that protects the state.
Okay, so if sovereignty is the shield, how does it lead to this strategy of silence? What's the connection?
Because of the logic chain the source highlights, it's actually very straightforward. If China places a massive, unwavering emphasis on its own sovereignty, if they demand that no one tells Beijing what to do, they have to apply that same logic outward to maintain any kind of consistency. This is not interference.
So the logic is, I demand you don't look in my windows, so I promise not to look in yours. It's a pact.
It is the diplomatic golden rule that's mentioned in the text. Imagine a scenario. There is a massive or a sudden violent change in leadership in country Y. The Western world, what does it do? It immediately rushes to the microphone and say, this is wrong, we support the people, we condemn the violence.
Right. We take a moral stance. We feel an obligation to speak up for democratic values or human rights. It's part of our political DNA.
But if China were to do that, if they were to publicly criticize another country's domestic crisis, they would be violating that core principle of non-interference. They would be breaking their own rule. And in doing so, they would be opening the door for other countries to critique them in return on their own domestic issues.
It's a reciprocal pact. I won't call you out, so you can't call me out.
Precisely. So when we see a massive crisis unfold somewhere in the world, and the cameras swing to the Chinese delegation, and they just sit there, stone-faced, not a word.
To a layperson or to a Western audience that's used to immediate moral condemnation, that looks like passivity. It looks like they don't care. It might even look like tacit approval of the bad thing that is happening.
Silence is violence, as the saying goes in activism circles. We interpret silence as complicity. But the source argues that to a diplomat, that silence looks like consistency. They are signaling, we are sticking to the rules of the game as we define them. We are reliable. We don't flip-flop based on the emotional temperature of the moment.
So it's consistency over optics. Or rather, the consistency is the optic they want to project to the rest of the world.
They want to be seen as the adult in the room who doesn't get swept up in the drama. While everyone else is screaming, they are observing, calculating.
This brings us to the vocabulary section of the deep dive. I found this part of the source material really fun because it's basically a decoder ring for the morning news.
Yeah, this is the practical application.
The source points out that you rarely see a headline that says China didn't say anything.
No, because that's not a story. It's a non-event. Journalism needs a verb. Journalism needs action. You can't write a headline that says China continues to sit quietly. It doesn't sell.
Right. So instead, the press and the diplomats themselves use these specific euphemisms. The source lists three big ones: exercising restraint, maintaining a neutral stance, and prioritizing behind-the-scenes diplomacy. I want to pick these apart word by word because I think they hide a lot of meaning.
Let's do it. They're all loaded phrases.
Exercising restraint. We see this all the time after a provocation or a crisis.
That is such a powerful phrase. Just think about the linguistics there. The word restraint implies holding back a significant force. You don't restrain a kitten. You don't restrain a gentle breeze.
No.
You restrain a lion. You restrain a flood. You restrain something powerful and potentially destructive.
So the word itself, just by being chosen, implies power.
Yes. When the news says a country is exercising restraint, it subtly acknowledges that they could do something drastic. They have the capability to escalate, to attack, to sanction, but they are consciously choosing not to. It frames the silence not as weakness, but as a form of immense discipline.
That is a huge shift in perspective. If I sit quietly in a corner because I'm scared, that's weakness. If I sit quietly in a corner while I'm holding a loaded gun, that's restraint.
And that is the image they want to project. We are powerful enough to destroy you, but we are disciplined enough not to. It's a power move disguised as passivity.
Okay, next one. Maintaining a neutral stance. This one feels a bit slippery to me. Can you really be neutral in a globalized, interconnected world? Is that even possible?
Well, the source argues that neutrality in this context is often a cover for active inaction. It's not that they don't have a side, it's that they are refusing to declare it publicly in order to preserve their options.
It's strategic ambiguity.
It is the definition of strategic ambiguity. By staying neutral, you can keep trading with both sides of a conflict. You can maintain relationships with countries that hate each other. You don't burn any bridges. It's the ultimate hedging of your bets.
Which brings us to the third phrase, which I think is the most important one because it hints at what's really going on. Prioritizing behind-the-scenes diplomacy.
This is the classic iceberg metaphor, isn't it? What you see above the water is the silence.
And the source makes a great point here. The phrase behind the scenes explicitly implies that while the public microphones are turned off, the private phone lines are red hot.
It suggests the silence is just for the show. It's for public consumption. But the actual negotiation, the real work, that's happening just not on Twitter or X or in front of press corps.
Why is that distinction so important for the listener to grasp?
Because we often assume that if we don't see the negotiation, it isn't happening. We live in such a performative culture, we assume silence means disengagement. But the source argues that the most important, most delicate conversations require silence to happen. They cannot happen in the light.
Why? Why can't we just have these talks in the open? Isn't transparency a good thing?
In theory, yes, but think about a hostage negotiation or a high-stakes corporate merger, or even asking for a raise. If you are shouting your demands in public, you back your opponent into a corner. You force them to defend their pride, their public image.
Right. If I demand a raise in front of the whole staff meeting, my boss has to say no just to show he's in charge, even if he thinks I deserve it.
Exactly. You've made it impossible for them to say yes. But if you do it in private, you give them room to maneuver. You give them a chance to say yes without looking like they surrendered to public pressure.
We're going to get into that face-saving aspect a bit later, because I think that is absolutely key to the cultural difference. But first, I want to move to the case studies.
Good idea.
Because all of this theory is great, sovereignty, restraint, whatever. But seeing it applied to real-world maps is where it clicks. The source material gives us two really distinct examples, Iran and Greenland.
And you couldn't pick two more different environments. One is sweltering heat and ancient desert geopolitics. The other is freezing ice and futuristic Arctic isolation.
Let's start with the desert. Let's talk about Iran. The source explicitly defines this relationship dynamic with one key phrase, energy security.
Right. To understand the silence here, we have to strip away the politics for a second and look at the bare bones economics. It's almost physics. China is the world's factory. It creates the goods we all buy. To run those factories, to power those massive cities, it is a voracious consumer of energy, insatiable.
And Iran has the tap. They're sitting on a massive reserve of oil and gas.
Iran is a massive producer. So at its most basic level, this relationship is simple supply and demand. Pipeline A goes to factory B. It's a commercial transaction.
But it's never just supply and demand when Iran is involved, right?
Well,
because Iran is, well, geopolitically complex, to put it mildly. It is under heavy international sanctions. Tensions in the Middle East are a constant simmer, and they frequently boil over.
constantly.
And usually when things heat up involving Iran, say a tanker is seized in the Strait of Hormuz or there's a drone strike, Western nations are very quick to react.
It's that rush to the mic again. You will see the US, the UK, France, Germany issuing strong condemnations, drawing red lines, announcing new sanctions packages. It is a very loud, very public form of diplomacy. It is moral condemnation.
And in contrast, the source notes that China remains quiet. Or if they speak, they use those restraint phrases we just learned. They call for calm on all sides.
And this is where we go back to that vocabulary word from the source, pragmatic. The source emphasizes that China prioritizes stability over ideology. This is a critical distinction for you, the listener, to understand. Western foreign policy is often driven by ideology, democracy, human rights, counterterrorism. These are values. We act based on what we think is right.
And China's approach, as described in the source, is purely transactional.
Transactional is the perfect word. The source uses it repeatedly. It means dealing with things sensibly and realistically, based on practical rather than theoretical or moral considerations. If China were to take a loud political stance, either for or against Iran, they risk destabilizing the flow of oil. That's the core calculation.
Let's play that out. If they publicly condemn Iran to please the West,
they anger a major energy supplier. Iran might cut the oil flow or raise the price. China's energy costs go up, their economy hurts. That's a direct hit to their national interests.
And on the flip side, if they fully endorse Iran and join in with anti-Western rhetoric,
they anger the rest of the world. They risk secondary sanctions from the U.S., which would be catastrophic. They risk their much larger trade relationships with Europe and America. It's a lose-lose situation from a public relations standpoint.
So the strategic silence here is a balancing act. It's a tightrope walk.
It is a way to walk between the raindrops. By avoiding taking sides publicly, they insulate their economic interests from the political fallout. They are essentially saying, we are here for the barrel of oil, not the argument. Our business is business.
It's business, nothing personal. But it's interesting because that silence can be infuriating to countries that view the conflict as a fundamental moral issue.
Of course. Which is why the source mentions that to the West, this looks like hiding or enabling or being cynical. But to the Chinese diplomats, it looks like protecting the national interest in its purest form. They're securing the fuel that keeps their lights on and their factories running.
It's a very cold calculation.
Geopolitics often is. The source material is very clear that this isn't about friendship, it's about function.
Okay, now, let's pivot. Let's go from the heat of Iran to the ice of Greenland. This is the part of the source material that really grabbed me, because I don't think people talk about Greenland enough. When I think of Greenland, I think of, well, ice, maybe some polar bears.
You and most of the world. But that is changing, and changing fast. The source introduces a concept here that's critical to understanding this case. The long game.
How long are we talking? Are we talking 5 years, 10 years?
Longer. If Iran is about immediate energy needs, keeping the lights on today, Greenland is about the next 50 years, maybe the next 100. The source frames this as planning for decades for a world that doesn't exist yet.
Why Greenland? What is so important about this giant block of ice?
2 huge reasons. First, geography. As the source highlights, melting ice is literally changing the map of the world. It is opening up potential new shipping lanes, the Polar Silk Road, that could drastically cut travel time between Asia and Europe.
Right.
If you control the ports in Greenland, you control the toll booths on the shipping lanes of the future.
And the second reason.
What's beneath the ice? The source says it's a treasure chest. Vast, untapped mineral resources. Rare earth minerals. The stuff we need for EV batteries, for smartphones, for wind turbines, for the entire future green economy.
Okay, so the stakes are massive. It's a strategic choke point and a resource gold mine all in one. But Greenland is also politically sensitive. It's an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It's geographically part of the North American continent. It's highly relevant to NATO. The U.S. has a critical air base there at Thule.
Exactly. It is a geopolitical minefield. Now, imagine if China marched in there with hard power.
And hard power being?
Military bases, warships, aggressive posturing, loud demands for territorial access.
That would trigger every single alarm bell in Washington and Brussels, the Monroe Doctrine 2.0.
It would be seen as a direct threat. The U.S. would lock it down immediately. It would become a massive international crisis overnight.
So China turns the volume down, way down.
All the way to zero. They use quiet diplomacy combined with economic presence. The source gives specific examples. Offering to fund and build new airports, investing in mining operations through state-owned enterprises.
This is what the text refers to as soft power.
Yes. This is a term originally coined by the political scientist Joseph Nye, but the source utilizes it to explain the Chinese strategy beautifully. Hard power is coercion guns, sanctions, do this or else. Soft power is attraction. It is investment, culture, infrastructure. It's making yourself appealing and indispensable.
It's the difference between kicking down the door and buying the house from the inside out.
That is a perfect analogy. By staying politically silent, not making speeches about Arctic control, not issuing grand manifestos, but remaining economically active. They build influence without creating an immediate crisis. They become indispensable to the local Greenlandic economy.
The takeaway phrase from the source on this was really strong and it stuck with me. Economic engagement speaks louder than political rhetoric.
It's a variation of money talks, isn't it?
Yeah.
While the politicians in Washington and Copenhagen are arguing about treaties and NATO alliances, the Chinese engineers are quietly building the runway. And 10 years later, when you look at who has real, on-the-ground influence in the region, it's the people who built the runway, not the people who gave the speeches.
That is the long game. It's patience weaponized. It's geological time almost.
And it actually requires silence. Noise draws attention. Attention brings regulation. Attention brings opposition. Silence allows the roots to grow deep before anyone even notices the tree.
I love that image. Roots growing in the dark. Okay, so we have Iran, which is all about pragmatism and immediate need. And we have Greenland, which is about a long game and patience. Both rely on silence. But this brings us to the cultural clash. The source material spends a good amount of time comparing this Eastern approach to the Western approach. And I think this is vital for the listener because we often judge other countries' behavior through our own cultural lens. We expect them to act like us, and when they don't, we assume something is wrong with them.
Exactly. We assume our operating system is the only one.
The Western approach, as described in the source, values transparency and public accountability.
Think about our political rituals. White House press briefings, Prime Minister's questions in the UK, congressional hearings, leaks to the press. In the West, we have this fundamental belief that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If there is a problem, we put it on the table. We argue about it in public, loudly.
It's the rush to the mic we started with.
It's exactly that. Western leaders want to control the narrative. If a crisis happens, the first thing a U.S. president or a U.K. prime minister does is stand at a podium. They have to show they are in charge, that they are doing something.
The key terms the source listed for the West were assertive, proactive, and vocal. These are seen as compliments in our culture. If you have a quiet leader in the West, people ask if you're asleep. They ask if you are weak.
But the Chinese approach is rooted in a completely different historical and cultural context. The source points to values of discretion and, crucially, face-saving.
Let's talk about face, Mianzi. This is a concept that I think a lot of Westerners know superficially, like don't embarrass someone in public. But the source really connects it to high-stakes diplomacy in a way I hadn't considered.
Face is essentially social standing, dignity, and honor. But in a diplomatic context, preserving the face of your partner, even your rival, is paramount to getting anything done.
The source argues that public criticism is viewed not just as a disagreement, but as a deliberate act of humiliation.
And humiliation ruins relationships. It makes cooperation impossible. Think about it. If I criticize you publicly, if I say the host is wrong and his ideas are dangerous, I've backed you into a corner. To keep your own dignity, your own face, you have to fight back. You cannot concede because everyone is watching. I've made it impossible for you to compromise.
So the silence is actually a way to give the other guy an off-ramp, a way for them to change course without looking weak.
Precisely. Silence allows the other party to fix the problem without public embarrassment. It's the difference between shouting at your employee in front of the whole office versus calling them into your office and closing the door.
If you shout, they resent you. They dig in. Their ego is on the line.
Yeah.
If you talk privately, you might actually solve the issue because you've preserved their dignity.
That is the logic. So when the West sees China's silence, we think lack of transparency, shady, hiding something. When China sees the West's loudness, they think reckless, immature, chaotic, undisciplined.
It's a clash of operating systems, a total miscommunication based on different cultural programming.
It really is. One side's virtue is the other side's vice. One looks like hiding something, the other looks like losing control. And this tension plays out in almost every international summit. You can see it in the body language, the press releases, and yes, most of all, in the silence.
This brings us to the most practical part of our deep dive today. We promised the listener a toolkit. The source material was designed for language learners, remember, so it gives us some codes to crack.
Right. We want to help you read between the lines. The next time you open a news app or read a paper, you are going to see these phrases. And now you won't just skim them, you'll see the strategy behind them.
Let's look at the first one. It's so common we don't even notice it. The delegation declined to comment.
Usually you scan right past that. You think, okay, no info here, moving on. But based on what we've learned today, you should pause. Decline to comment is not empty words. It is a deliberate move. it's an action.
What is it signaling then? What's the real message?
It likely means we are in the middle of a very delicate negotiation, and we are not going to ruin it by giving you a soundbite that will inflame the situation. Or it means we disagree with you profoundly, but we are saving your face by not saying it aloud.
It's an active refusal. It's a shield against the noise. Okay, what about this one? Calling for dialogue or urging restraint. We hear this constantly.
This is classic diplomatic code. It sounds nice and fluffy, right? Who doesn't want dialogue? But in this context, it often translates to, we are extremely worried about what you are doing, but we are not going to fight about this in public because we have other business to attend to. Or, this is getting out of hand and it's bad for business.
So urging restraint is basically a polite, almost coded way of saying, put the gun down, but I'm saying it in a whisper so you don't feel threatened and do something stupid.
Yes. It signals disapproval without escalation. It is the yellow light, not the red light. It's a warning, but a quiet one.
I feel like I'm going to read the news completely differently now. It's like seeing the Matrix code. These phrases that seem like filler suddenly have weight.
That is the goal. When you understand the vocabulary of silence, the silence becomes the loudest part of the story. You start listening for what isn't being said.
Let's do a quick-fire review of the heavy hitters we discussed today, just to lock them in for the listener. The key terms from the source.
Okay.
Multilateral.
Involving many countries. The source notes China prefers this when they want to dilute U.S. power. If you can't win a one-on-one fight, invite a crowd. It diffuses the pressure.
Strategic ambiguity.
Remaining vague on purpose. Keeping your options open so your enemy doesn't know how you will react. It keeps them guessing, which is a form of power in itself.
Sovereignty.
The absolute right to self-rule. The shield against criticism. The foundation of the my house, my rules doctrine.
And my favorite, soft power.
Influence through attraction and economy. Buying the airport, not bombing it. The roots in the dark.
It really is a different language. It's not just different words. It's a different grammar of power.
It is. And as the source material from the Advanced Learner Studio points out, English in a global context isn't just about grammar. You can know all the words in the dictionary, but if you don't understand the cultural context, if you don't understand why a country stays silent, you miss the message entirely.
You miss the story. You miss the reality of the situation.
And you might misinterpret a calculated strategic move as a mistake or as weakness, which is a dangerous assumption to make.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought. The source material ends with this challenge, and I think it's a great one to carry into your week.
Next time a crisis breaks out, and there will be a next time, whether it's in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or the South China Sea, don't just look at who is shouting. Don't just look at the podiums with the microphones and the breaking news banner.
Look for the gap. Look for the empty chair.
Look for who isn't talking. Find the silence.
And then ask yourself, what is their silence buying them?
Is it oil? Is it time? Is it influence? Or is it simply the ability to walk away when the dust settles without having promised anything to anyone?
Because in a noisy world, the quietest person in the room is usually the one you need to watch the closest.
That is often where the real power lies.
But before we let you go, I want to circle back to something we touched on but maybe didn't fully explore. We talked about face as a way to avoid embarrassment. But I feel like there is a deeper layer there we missed. The source hints at face being a form of currency, not just a feeling.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you caught that. Because if we just leave it as being polite, we are seriously underselling it. In the source materials context, face isn't just about personal feelings, it's about legitimacy. It is political capital.
Right, like if a government loses face internationally, it can actually destabilize them domestically with their own population.
Precisely. And this is where the silence becomes a transaction. If China stays silent about a partner's public mistake, they are essentially banking political capital. They are saying, I could have destroyed you in the press today. I didn't. You owe me.
Oh, that is diabolical. I love it. It's not just politeness. It's a debt mechanism. It's leverage.
It is absolutely leverage. Think about the Iran example again. By not joining the Western chorus of condemnation, China isn't just being neutral. They are building a debt of gratitude with the Iranian leadership. The implied message is, when everyone else abandoned you, we were quiet. We kept buying your oil.
That buys a kind of loyalty that money can't always purchase.
Exactly. And that makes the transactional nature we talked about feel much more human. It's transactional, but it's based on this social currency of face and respect and obligation.
So let's re-examine the Greenland case with that lens. quiet diplomacy. We said it was about not scaring the West. But is it also about giving the Greenlandic or Danish governments face?
That is a very sharp observation, yes. 100%. If China were to publicly demand access to Arctic ports, it puts the Danish government in a terrible position. They look weak to their allies if they say yes, and they risk a massive economic opportunity if they say no. It forces a public conflict.
But if the deal happens quietly, through a third-party company or something?
If it happens quietly through a private company or a low-key investment deal for an airport expansion, nobody loses face. Denmark doesn't look like they are surrendering sovereignty. The U.S. doesn't feel immediately threatened because there was no press conference declaring China conquers the Arctic and China gets the airport.
Everybody wins, or at least everybody saves face, which allows the deal to happen.
And the silence is the lubricant that makes that machine work. Without the silence, the political friction would burn the whole deal down before it even got started.
It's amazing how much noise actually stops things from happening. It makes me think about how Western democracies really struggle with this, because our leaders have to make noise to get elected and stay in power.
That is the structural disadvantage, or difference, depending on how you view it. A Western leader has a domestic audience that demands performance. They have an opposition party that will attack them for being weak. What are you doing about country X? If the answer is, I'm staying silent to facilitate a delicate back-channel deal, they might lose the next election. They look inactive.
So they have to sacrifice the strategic silence for domestic political noise.
Often, yes. Which gives a strategic advantage to a system that doesn't have that same immediate electoral pressure. They can afford to be silent. They can afford the long game.
This connects back to that silence of ignorance versus strategic silence. The Western public, and even our media, often mistakes strategic silence for ignorance or weakness.
Correct. And the source implies that Chinese diplomats sometimes rely on that misunderstanding. They are perfectly happy to let you think they are passive while they are actively pouring the concrete for a runway in the Arctic.
Being underestimated is a superpower.
It is the ultimate camouflage. No one sees you as a threat until it's too late.